Good afternoon, Gail. We're very happy to have another wonderful, interesting guest with us today. A former teacher, an avid user of the library, Gail Kennelly. Gail, thank you for being here. You come from a very interesting ancestry of residents who were very involved in the town of Secaucus. Could you provide us with a brief overview of your lineage?
Sure. The first name that I remember hearing in the family was Frederick Huber, and he would be my great-great-grandfather. He was the father of Jacob F. Huber, Frederick after him, Huber, and he was the first mayor of Secaucus from 1900 to 1906. Huber Street was named after his family. Two women who were instrumental in the start of the first Secaucus Public Library were Bertha Huber, my grandmother, and Helma Graham. She was a friend and former neighbor who now lives in Florida. She just celebrated her 110th birthday. Two strong women. They were both on a temporary committee which first met on August 23rd, 1934, and they wanted to discuss the possibility of the first Secaucus Public Library. I'd like to tell you a little bit about each of those women. The first one is Bertha Huber. She was very active in the First Reformed Church of Secaucus, especially in its Women's Guild and the Huber Street School PTA. She was a former president of both those organizations. Bertha married Jacob Frederick Huber's son, Louis Philip Huber, my grandfather. Louis was the president of the New Jersey Trust Company in Secaucus. He died in his early 40s, leaving his wife Bertha to raise their 5 children, ages 5 to 17. Each of Bertha's 5 children as adults played an active role in the First Reformed Church of Secaucus as Sunday school teachers, members of the Women's Guild, junior choir assistants, consistory members, and church events. I'd like to tell you a little bit about each of those 5 children and how they grew up. Ruth Huber was 17 years old when her father Louis died and had already completed high school and 2 years of state normal school with a college degree for teaching. She was the 4th grade teacher at Huber Street School. I say the 4th grade teacher because there was only one classroom for each grade, no kindergarten. And Ruth had her own brother as a student, as well as myself and my sister and 4 of my cousins. When a teaching degree required 4 years of college, even though she was grandfathered with her 2-year degree from state normal school, she continued her education. She earned a 4-year degree, a master's degree, and 32 college credits, achieving straight A's all through her classes. Ruth became a reading specialist at Huber Street School, and after 46 years of being an educator, she retired. The Huber Street School Library was named the Ruth Huber Library. Outside the library, there's a plaque on the wall in her honor. I also taught at Huber Street School while my Aunt Ruth was a teacher, and my cousin Kathy Huber O'Connell was on the Board of Education currently. She was in the 5th grade at Huber Street School at that time. Call me old.
Always interesting.
The second child, Beatrice Huber, was about 14 years old when her dad died, and after graduating high school, she went to secretarial school and was employed at Hoboken and in the later years the World Trade Center. When I was teaching at Huber Street School 3rd grade, she arranged a field trip for me to go with my class to World Trade Center and give a tour. And tours were not given at that time, so it was a really special event and the children did enjoy it. Thank God she retired way before 9/11. Helen Huber, my mother, the middle child, was about 12 years old. After graduating high school, she also went to further schooling. She became a licensed beautician. She initially worked in New York City, and then later she opened her own business called Helen's Beauty Shop, located on Patterson Plank Road near the corner of Huber Street. And there's still a beauty shop there today. Myrtle Huber. She was about 9 years old when her dad, Louis, died. After high school, she attended dance classes, and she became a professional dancer. Eventually, she opened up her own dancing school in Secaucus. Classes were held at 1041 Poplar Street, which was named after the large poplar tree in that yard. My cousin Kathy Huber O'Connell lives there today. Myrtle's mom, Bertha, and her sister, Ruth, lived in that house during this time. Myrtle taught dance classes, Ruth played the piano for the students, and Bertha made all the costumes for the recital. Myrtle Avenue, which is the next block after Poplar Street, was named after Myrtle Huber. A. Lewis Huber. He was only 5 years old when his dad died. A. Lewis Huber was his legal name. His mother, Bertha, promised Dr. Owl if this was a boy, she would name him after him, not knowing the doctor's name was Archibald. The block after Myrtle Avenue is named Arch Avenue, which is short for Archibald, named after A. Lewis Huber. Lewis attended Huber Street School and had his sister Ruth as his teacher. After graduating high school, he served in the United States Army, and after World War II, he became a Secaucus police officer. Later on, he purchased and worked at the deli on Clarendon Street, which today is Natoli's Deli. Lewis also purchased a second deli, which was on the corner of Huber Street and Patterson Plank Road. It had been previously owned by several different families, one of which was the Graham family. Now I'd like to tell you about that other wonderful woman, Helma Graham. Helma lived with her son, Richard Graham, on the corner of Gary Terrace and Franklin Street. Prior to Lou Huber, they too owned and worked the corner deli at Huber Street and Patterson Plank Road. After many decades and many owners, there is still a deli on that corner today. Auntie Graham, as I call her, was a friend of my family before I was born. I became her neighbor 44 years ago when I bought the house diagonally across the street from her. Even though she currently lives in Seminole, Florida with her granddaughter, we've stayed in touch over the years. The Secaucus Home News has featured a birthday picture of Helma Graham for her 108th birthday, 109th birthday, and her most recently, her 110th birthday. Two very strong women that were influential in this town.
Not only were they influential in this town, I just want to remind our listening audience, they were on the original steering committee to form the library, as you said before, in 1934.
Yes.
So they must be thrilled today that you are sitting in that chair. From your perspective as a youngster, I'm taking you back now, would you please take us on the journey to the old library, the first library, that original one up on the top of the town hall?
Certainly. My early memories of the original library, the first library in the original town hall, was that it was surrounded by a beautiful park with trees and pathways and grass and bushes and flowers and benches. And in my early adult years, I was teaching Sunday school at the First Reformed Church. And in good weather, I would take them over to that park, and we would have our Sunday school lesson there. They were much more attentive, and it was a lovely background to be in. On that property, there was a metal bell, and it had Jacob F. Huber's name on it and his council people. And to this day, that bell is on the property adjacent to the current town hall. But my earliest memories of Secaucus Library, the first one, was in the summer of 1954 or 1955. I would have been 8 or 9 years old in 4th or 5th grade. It was over the summer. And the town provided a service for the children. They would pick up the boys and girls from the property by the town hall, the original town hall, and they would take them to the they would take them to the Y. The boys would go to the YMCA swimming pool, and the girls would go to the YWCA swimming pool, because boys and girls weren't mixing in those days. And on the return, after some swimming and some swimming lessons and fun, they would drop them back off on the town property that I described earlier. And at that point, I gained access to the new library. I had to go inside. There wasn't any outside stairwell or separate stairwell. You had to go into the main building of the municipal building. And when I entered the town hall, the first thing I saw, and the first thing I remember, were the stairs. There were 3 flights of stairs. The first flight was nice and wide. It was either a polished concrete or a marble and polished concrete. but it was large enough for people to go up the stairway and down the stairway at the same time. And the town hall didn't have air conditioning. You might be surprised by that, but no one had air conditioning, not even the houses at that point in time. So as you were walking up this wide stairway with other people passing, it was getting hotter and hotter. And you'd get to the first landing, and you had the second set of identical stairways, another large stairway with people going up and down. And then I started to puff a little bit, because now I'm going with the second flight of stairs. And I'm only 9 years old, and I'm skinny too at the time. I'm getting ready for the next staircase. And I'd go up the second flight of stairs, and by then I'm like really, getting out of breath, and it's really hot. And then you turn and you get the pièce de résistance, you get this little spiral stairway. And again, I was only 9 years old and very skinny, and I felt cramped on that. I have no idea how Mrs. Dudley climbed those 3 sets of stairs day in and day out. God bless her. Now, the room. The room, I call it the room because it was a room. And it was stuffy and hot, even stuffier and hotter than the stairway. And there was one desk and one chair. And there was standing room only, because the walls around the perimeter of the room were from the floor almost to the ceiling, and it was covered with books. And then in the open area in the center of the room, there were bookcases, standalone bookcases that were two-sided, and they were parallel to each other, and they filled the entire center of the room. Again, I was only 9 years old, and I felt cramped going through those little aisles with the books. And there was standing room only, that's why, because it was so tightly packed. Mrs. Dudley ran a tight ship. There was no talking in the library. The only people that could talk is if anybody standing in front of Mrs. Dudley's desk wanted an answer to a question or needed to be pointed out where to look for something. And Mrs. Dudley was always very happy and very helpful to help the people. And there would usually be, when I was there, maybe 3 or 4 people online, some children, some adults. And when I got to Mrs. Dudley's desk, I had asked her what I wanted, and again, she was very helpful. And she was like a grandmother figure, and that's how I react to her, because she and my grandmother, I guess at that time, were about the same age. And she was a very helpful, wonderful librarian. The one thing I do remember was I had an overdue book, and I had to pay 2 cents as a fine and a penalty for this overdue book, and I cried because I thought it was a really bad person because I had this overdue book. So I reached out to my cousin John because he went through grammar school and junior high school with me, and I wanted to find out if he had any memories of that first library up in the very top of the town hall. And he sent me an email, and I'd like to read it to you right now because I think it might give you a chuckle. Hi, Gail. You asked me for some recollections of the Secaucus Library, and these are hazy at best since it's been 55 years now since I've lived in Secaucus. However, I do remember the library at the top of the old municipal building being very dark and particularly hot during the summer when I most often went there. It appeared to me to be very likely to be haunted and to house a collection of bats hanging upside down from the rafters. Looking back on it today, it would have been the perfect place to film a movie of a Stephen King novel. The narrow, dark, creaky stairs alone would have people on the edge of their seats. If it weren't for our love of reading and graduating from comic books to lofty pursuits, I don't think I would have risked going up there. I'm really glad that Secaucus was able to relocate the library shortly after we moved away. The town is better for it. Love, John. That was one of Myrtle Huber Greenleaf's sons.
That is a joy. You're right. It gave us a chuckle, but your whole description gave me a chuckle. The way you were describing how hot and difficult it was to go up those stairs. You weren't alone in that, but you are the very first, I think, to confirm that it was a circular staircase at the top. That seems to be the big question of these interviews. So you definitely remember it as circular.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I'm so glad. 3 years later, when the library was too cramped and crowded, it was moved to the Plaza Center location. adjacent to Engine Company Number 1. What did you think of the new library at that time? How old would you have been, and what were your thoughts?
The second library, located in the center of town, I was there during my junior high school years in Lincoln Junior High School, grades 7 through 9. During the time would be like 1958, 59, and 60, and I would have been 11, 12, and 13. I do remember very clearly my first memory of that second library, the first book I had checked out. And the name of the book was Angel Unaware. Dale Evans had written the book. Many of you have no idea who Dale Evans is. However, she was married to Roy Rogers, who was a very popular television cowboy on television in the late 50s and early 60s. And Dale Evans and Roy Rogers were husband and wife. The context of the book was about losing her daughter. The journey that she experienced was a very tough one. And as I think of the book today, I can see the cover distinctly. The background was a very pale coral, and there was a large black and white photo of Dale Evans and her daughter, who looked about 2.5 years old, in a little party dress. Through my high school years, 1961 to 1963, grades 10 to 12, because I had already done 9th grade in Lincoln Junior High School, the new library was a godsend. Because Secaucus did not have a high school, I was a bus student. Now, the Weehawken High School had a library, but its hours were open during school hours. So if you couldn't get it there, the only other choice was Weehawken Library itself, which was within walking distance, but I could never walk there and gotten back in time for the bus. There were 2 buses, an early bus and a late bus. I wouldn't have gotten on either one of them. So I did all my term papers and all my required reading from that library, the second library in the center of town. And then in 1964, when I was in my first year of college, I remember a service that the library provided for the residents of the town. It was the distribution of the Sabin oral vaccine, and it was distributed on a little sugar cube.
Mm-hmm.
The first month it was distributed in 1964 was in March, and there were 3 types of vaccines on 3 different cubes. The first one was called Type 1, and the following month, April, we received the second distribution, but it was Type 3. And then in the month of April, the 3rd month, we received Type 2. So I don't know if it was supposed to be given in that sequence, or if it was just that maybe Type 3 wasn't available at the time the library was able to accommodate the town, and they did Type 3 ahead of Type 2. So I'm not really sure, but there were 3 types, and I'm very glad that it did end polio, because my dad had polio when he was a child, and it left him as an adult with a slight limp. So I thank God that that was done, and the library made that possible for the townspeople.
Did being a teacher influence your thinking about libraries?
Can I just digress a moment?
Yes, please do.
I forgot, in the 70s, another function of the second town library.
Okay, please fill us in.
Okay. The 70s, both of my children at age 3 went through Story Hour, and Story Hour was longer than an hour. And Ruth McCormick had an assistant. I don't remember the assistant's name, but Ruth McCormick was in charge. And some of the activities they did were games and arts and crafts, and they sang songs, and they were action songs, and then they also listened to the stories read through Story Hour. On special occasions, they invited parents, like for Halloween parties and Christmas parties, and there was snacks served, and they let us enjoy and see and share with them at the Story Hour to see what it was like. And those were my most 3 memorable events of the second library in the center of town.
I'm so thankful that you mentioned Ruth McCormick. Ruth McCormick was working there when I was there, and so many people have remembered her fondly. So we moved from Mrs. Dudley to Ruth McCormick and Mrs. Grazioli as the 3 people most remembered so far in these interviews. But I started to ask you about being a teacher because I know that you have educational background and your working experience. Did it influence your thinking about a library, and what did you think about this third library when it was introduced to the community? Do you expect it to be as it is, or were you expecting something different?
Well, regarding the current library, the new one on Patterson Plank Road Library, number 3, I think it's state of the art. I mean, there's nothing missing from that library. It suits every purpose that someone would like to go there, and it's current and it's keeping up with the times. The resources and the programs and amenities, they're endless. And it was an honor to purchase a paving block in the memory of the Huber family at the entryway when that new library was being built. Regarding the future longevity of that library, as a former teacher, I have to deflect to history. Secaucus is a growing community, and change is inevitable. When I was born and going to the first public library in my junior years, I never envisioned all of the changes that I would experience in my own lifetime, and I'm sure the generations before me felt the same way. So the modes of communication, education, and transportation change, and so will libraries.
They will. You are so right. I asked that question because we asked students that question when we were back in library number 2.
I still call that the first library.
Do you
The second library.
The second library.
Excuse me, erase that.
Yeah.
I still call the second library the new library.
Okay, it was so new to you.
Yeah.
But when we asked the children to draw posters of what they thought the library would be 20 years later, and that was in the 1980s, they had Mrs. Grazioli and the staff flying around the library as robots, getting the books. We were on these little strings going around. So I suggest that they do that again and see what these students or what our interviewees could imagine for the future.
I'd be interested in seeing the sketches that they do make.
I would love to. We'll put you on as a judge. I want to thank you because you were a wonderful interview. We not only got a little bit of history of the library, we got your story of the library, and we certainly got a little bit of town history in there. So don't go far. I'm sure somebody else is going to reach out to you for filming on the town of Secaucus. Thank you so much, Gail.
You're welcome. My pleasure.